This episode of the Dysregulated podcast features discussion of events relating to suicidal ideation, self-harm and substance abuse. This episode may be triggering for some listeners and features a content warning. If you or someone you care about needs support, please visit www.blackdog.org.au or www.beyondblue.org for more information and helpful resources. If you reside in Australia, you can call Lifeline on 131114 or Beyond Blue on 1300 224 636. For listeners outside of Australia, please visit www.findahelpline.com. G'day everybody, my name is Elliot Waters and you're listening to the Dysregulated podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Today's episode is the next instalment of the Discharge Papers series. I'm very excited. I've got the papers with me here. It's going to be a beauty. But before we get into that, I do want to say if you're enjoying the show, feel free to like, subscribe, give us a rating and share it around with your mates. I've got great news that on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, we have a perfect 5-star rating. So thank you to everybody who has rated the show 5 stars. I really do appreciate it. And it's really good for the algorithms. So thank you very much. And I hope that it is worthy of a 5-star rating because this episode, like so many that have come before, you know, there's no such thing, even though at the top of these papers, right, these discharge summaries, it says private and confidential. But let me tell you, there are no secrets on this show. I am an open book. My story is your story as well if you want it to be. All right, so we're on this journey together, and with this podcast, there is no such thing as private and confidential. So if you think that's pretty cool and it's worthy of a 5-star rating, please give us a rating. That would be awesome. All right, moving right along, let's have a look at the discharge summaries from the Maitland Private Hospital. And it goes something like this. Name, Mr. Elliot Waters, that's me, admitted on the 21st of October 2022 and discharged on the 18th of November 2022. So we're in there almost a full month. Then it lists my diagnoses, which is plenty. So pen and paper when you're ready. Let's have a go. All right, we've got OCD, Asperger's / high functioning autism, ADHD, borderline personality disorder, bipolar type 2, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, possible seasonal affective disorder, and I think that is all of them. I think there's so many labels. I'm going to do an episode on these labels and see if having or collecting these labels is actually helpful or if it's been detrimental to my journey. So I will dive into that at some point because I've collected heaps. And you may remember from previous episodes that during my time in the Maitland Private Hospital, in the psychiatric ward there, I was given the diagnosis of Asperger's or high-functioning autism, so I collected another label. Anyway, let's move right along. Background. Mr. Elliot Waters was a 32-year-old male, I still am, who had long-standing mental health issues with multiple diagnoses in the past. He had a long history of poor response to psychotropic medications and presented for admission for a medication overhaul. That is right. A big overhaul was required, and that is exactly what we got. So as I turn the page, it continues. Elliot had a deterioration of mental state prior to admission with obsessive, negative, intrusive thoughts, particularly around his relationship with his current girlfriend, where he had thoughts that she was going to cheat on him, even though, and this is the most important part, there was no evidence to suggest that this was the case. I'm going to say that again. So my BPD is listening because that is where this sort of material has risen from. Unfortunately, this is classic BPD. There was no evidence to suggest that this was the case. None whatsoever. And this is exactly what BPD does. It creates these false narratives and puts you in this fight or flight, defensive mode. And it says, right, something really bad, usually something around the abandonment sort of idea or someone's going to leave and, it's going to be terrible. BPD comes up with this false narrative and then uses its friend, OCD in my case, to jam home the point. So I did an episode about the relationship between BPD, OCD, and depression as well. So if you've got some questions, I would definitely recommend listening to that episode. I think I explained it clearly enough. But in short, that's what happens. BPD comes up with this false narrative and says, righto, OCD, this is what I want you to say to Elliot repeatedly over and over again. And that's what the OCD does. It just jams it home, and it is terrible. And the problem is, this is the problem with borderline personality disorder, because it doesn't just bring the individual who's got it down. Don't get me wrong. It is so detrimental to people that have it. It's been so detrimental to me. But the worst part, I think, is that it drags other people in, the people that you care about the most. It drags them in and tries to drag them down with you as well. And it is terrible. And then you're guilty, you've got regrets, and it's terrible. Anyway, so me, unfortunately, thinking that my girlfriend, who has been nothing but so supportive, caring and kind, and I cannot thank her enough. I'll probably do a tribute to her on one of these episodes one day, so get ready for that. But that's exactly what happens. BPD makes you think that these things are going to happen, and it just is not true. When you check the facts, which is a DBT technique, check the facts, there is no evidence to suggest this at all. Borderline personality is a terrible, terrible disorder, and I'll tell you what, it's been a tough fight trying to push back against those thoughts when OCD jumps in as well, but that's exactly what we've been doing. All right, let's move on. Okay, so me thinking these things has brought on, irritability and anger, which he felt he had difficulty controlling at times, as well as anxiety and catastrophic thinking, which had been long-standing for him. Yes, very much, as long as I can remember. He'd had suicidal thoughts, in particular of slitting his throat. Yeah, but these were not intense and there were no firm plans. No, that is true. He had a history of mental issues. In 2011, he was intoxicated with suicidal thoughts of walking in front of traffic on the New England Highway, and he was assessed at Tamworth Base Hospital. When he was 18, he was diagnosed with depression and anxiety and started on fluoxetine or Prozac. He had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, in 2018 due to periods of elevated mood, pressure of speech, increased spending of money, and the reduced need for sleep. He also had a diagnosis of BPD, that's of course borderline personality disorder, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder. In 2019, he'd had several admissions to the Mater Hospital, which we know because I've done episodes about that. As I turn the page again. So several admissions to the Mater Hospital, what he describes as dissociative experiences and suicidal ideation after a relationship breakup. True. Leading up to his current admission in 2022 with worsening, negative, ruminating thoughts. I tell you what, there is a lot of my story that I haven't told yet on this podcast. There is so much material to come. For example, just briefly, this mentions a relationship breakup, and there is a lot that happened at that time, which has brought on a lot of the things that are happening now. So I need to go through that in some episodes moving forward as well. But to be honest, it's very, very raw stuff, and there's lots of regrets and remorse around that period. So it's going to be a big effort to do that episode, but it is coming because it explains a lot about what is going on now. Anyway, moving forward, in regards to risk, there had been no previous attempts of suicide, even though he'd had suicidal ideation. And that's true. The closest I got was in Tamworth. So I'll explain this quickly. For people that don't know, Tamworth is in the country in New South Wales, and it hosts the Country Music Festival, Australia's largest music festival. So what happened was I was going through a really tough period in Tamworth because I moved there from Newcastle for a job opportunity and I didn't know anybody, and it was really tough work. It was tough going. And I remember I was at my limit, and the country music festival was on, so I was going to the pubs and listening to the bit of country music, having a beer. And anyway, it all got too much, and I was just drinking as much as I could. And I come up with this idea: if I walk out onto the highway, I'll get hit by a truck, and that's a way to go. That's it. Thankfully, I got so drunk on this particular occasion, I walked out the front of the pub, and then I collapsed in a park that was next to the highway, and I was so drunk I couldn't walk. So what happened was that I was on the phone to a previous girlfriend, funnily enough, and I was saying that my plan was to walk in front of the traffic, She rang the police in Tamworth. She was in Newcastle at the time. She rang the police and they came and picked me up along with the ambulance. And thank God I drank so much that I could not walk, because that was a very scary experience. Anyway, there's a bit more to that story. It deserves its own episode as well. So let's press on. Okay. There was no forensic history. This is a good part. He had a history of binge drinking and also a history of illicit drug use, including MDMA, cocaine, ecstasy, and THC. Look, yes, I've dabbled in a few of these things, but I wouldn't say it's ever been consistent. Anyway, that probably is another episode as well. Although he'd been abstinent for the past 2 years and there was no IV drug use, thank goodness. In the past, he'd been on multiple psychotropic medications. Here we go. Pen and paper again. We have fluoxetine, sertraline, escitalopram, venlafaxine, desvenlafaxine, bupropion, lithium, olanzapine, quetiapine, chlorpromazine, propranolol, clonidine, pregabalin, dexamphetamine, Ritalin, Vyvanse, lorazepam, diazepam, temazepam. Fair income. That is 19 or 20 medications, multiple medications that did not work. And it continues. He'd never been on sodium valproate, lamotrigine, tricyclic antidepressants, or monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So, just to explain that a little bit, I have been on lots of medications. I think I'm up to 24 now, different medications. So I've tried a lot, but in saying that, there's a few classes of drugs, of medications that I haven't tried up until now. And one of those, as we'll go on to in a minute, is the tricyclic antidepressants. But we'll continue. Elliot has a strong family history of mental illness, which I won't go into too much detail because obviously a lot of that is private for the other people who are impacted, but it is true. There is a lot of mental illness in my family, and it's no real surprise that unfortunately I've been afflicted with it as well. There is no significant medical history. He grew up in Newcastle. His parents are together and has 2 half-older sisters and 1 younger sister. Elliot grew up feeling that he was never good enough. Now, that wasn't necessarily due to my family, and we're going to dive into that a little bit more too at some point, but it is true. I did grow up through primary school and high school thinking that I just did not measure up. That is true. There was no other developmental trauma. During school, he reported being disruptive and inattentive. That's the ADHD. When he left school, he started a business degree but did not complete this. He eventually got into psychology and completed an honours degree at the end of 2021 in psychological science. He was keen on looking into doing his Masters of Clinical or Professional Psychology, but unfortunately his mental state has got in the way of this. He works at Bunnings Warehouse and has been there for 6 years. He is in a stable relationship with his girlfriend, Lucy, who, as I said, has been nothing but amazing, and she deserves her own episode. Wait for that one. Okay, progress. Elliot was admitted to the ward. We undertook a medication overhaul and took him off sertraline, lorazepam, and pregabalin and started the tricyclic antidepressant clomipramine, working up to a dose of 200 milligrams at night. During the changeover in medications, Elliot had discontinuation symptoms and withdrawals, in particular coming off the sertraline, lorazepam, and pregabalin respectively. This improved after a few days, and overall, his mental state improved significantly with the changes. Elliot engaged in one-on-one psychological input and group programs. Over the course of his admission, his mental state improved. As we turn the page. Of note, Elliot was tolerating the clomipramine reasonably well, but had mild side effects, including dry mouth, which I'm struggling with at the moment, blurred vision, which I also have a bit of at the moment as I'm trying to read this piece of paper, and urinary retention. He could still pass urine okay, but it took him 10 to 15 seconds before it would start, and unfortunately that has blown out a little bit more. He said that was manageable and wasn't overly concerned. All right, so clomipramine is a tricyclic antidepressant. So this is different than SSRIs or SNRIs, which a lot of people have heard of and are on. Tricyclic antidepressants aren't as popular anymore. They are old school. So whereas the SSRIs come around in about the 90s and early 2000s, tricyclic antidepressants are from the 60s and 70s. This is old school stuff. Now, what the doctor said to me was that, Elliot, people like you that are wired a little bit differently, and we're referring to my new Asperger's high-functioning autism diagnosis. He said, people who are wired a bit differently like you, Elliot, the SSRIs, SNRIs, the newer medications that are very clean, don't work as well. People like you, Elliot, need the old school stuff, the ones that affect and go into every region of the brain. They're not specific, because SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Tricyclic antidepressants are not selective. They go to more areas of the brain. And for people like me, whose wiring is a bit all over the shop, it appears that these older medications do the job better. The only problem is the reason tricyclic antidepressants as a class, there's a few of them, clomipramine is just one of, the reason why these medications aren't used as much as the newer drugs, the SSRIs, SNRIs, is because the side effects are not as manageable or tolerated as well. The side effects is a bit of a problem. And I listed a few: dry mouth, blurred vision, urination problems. And there can be others. There can be constipation, there can be tremors, there's confusion, memory problems. My memory is not very good, I must admit. That is another side effect that I'm having. Unfortunately, the tricyclics do come with a higher rate of side effects, and sometimes they are intolerable. There's the dry mouth again. Try and stick with me. This is a very hard episode to get out, let me tell you. So I hope that makes sense. The tricyclics are old school. They're not as clean as the SSRIs, for example, and I'm going to do an episode on tricyclic antidepressants as well. But that is the gist of the story. They're not as clean, so the side effects are a bit more severe, and unfortunately, I have a few of them. But this is the way I was thinking, and this is why I said to my doctor when I reported these side effects that I'm having, if I can be happy and enjoy life and actually engage with the world and have a good time and really try and do my best and be in the frame of mind to be able to do that, then you know what? If it takes me 30, 40, 60 seconds before I can urinate, who cares? Because at the end of the day, if I'm able to have a successful relationship and I'm getting very emotional. This is a bit weird. This isn't what I thought was going to happen. But anyway, we'll proceed. But that's the thing, leading up until this point, I lost the ability to have fun and enjoy life. And I was heading down the path of ruining another relationship. And this is a relationship that this is the big one, she's bloody brilliant. And there is no way I can stuff this up. But when you've got BPD and OCD and all these other diagnoses working against you, it is very, very difficult. So when you find a medication that finally pushes back against these diagnoses, these labels, these disorders, you got to hold on to it and you got to stay on it. And the side effects are not good, but there is no way that I can get off clomipramine now because this medication actually does something for once. I've listed so many medications in the past that I've tried. Finally, clomipramine is doing something, and that is amazing. So if I have to put up with some side effects, but I'm happy and, having a successful relationship and getting back into work and doing all the good things, things that other people maybe take for granted, I certainly don't. I cherish all those positive moments, that's for sure. But if I find a medication that finally allows that, facilitates me to enjoy life and really engage properly, you got to hold on to it. So these side effects are difficult, but, if you do a risk-benefit analysis, well, at this point, we're sticking with it because we're actually able to have some fun again and be happy and actually be a good boyfriend. How good is that? It's amazing. Anyway, come on, we'll keep going. So, towards the later stage of admission, Elliot had a wedding that he wished to attend. I did. Elle and Bert, who are great fans of the podcast, I'm sure they're going to listen to this episode. It was an amazing wedding and I was so honoured. I played a very key role, which I was a bit nervous about, but I did it successfully, and I'm so happy that I did because I love them both. and they have been so supportive. Ella's come up and visited me in Maitland. It's a bit of a drive for those that aren't aware, from Newcastle, where we're all from, to Maitland, where I was in hospital. You know, my girlfriend come up every day. She only missed one day when I was in the hospital. She come after work, and Elle was up there every second day to see me and make sure I was okay. These are the people you need to hold on to, and it's really amazing. Anyway, so Elle was getting married, and I really wanted to go. So I opted for discharge. This is the doctor's words again. I'm back into the discharge papers. He opted for discharge the day before the wedding. I gave him a management plan if the urinary retention worsened. And that's right, I did have to drop my dosage of clomipramine down a little bit from 200 milligrams to 150, but we're back up to 200 milligrams because the clomipramine is doing a good job, and let's stick with it. All right, upon discharge, Elliot was bright and reactive. There was no formal thought disorder, no psychosis, and no suicidal ideation. He was orientated, insightful, and hopeful towards the future. Now, I have to interrupt there because, see, this is the problem. I'll be completely honest with you, as I always am on this podcast. I don't remember much of the day that I was discharged. I don't remember packing my gear. I know I left a lot of my stuff in my room at the hospital. I do not remember much about the discussion that I had with the doctor. It was not good. So I sort of put on an act and tried to pretend everything was okay. I even tried to fool myself and believe that everything was okay because I really wanted to go to the wedding, which I did, and I'm so glad that I did. But the problem is, when I was discharged, I think I was in a pseudo-manic state, and I do not remember it very well at all. I do not remember it because I was high flying. I don't know why, but my brain did this. This is what happens, unfortunately, with bipolar and BPD. I went to this elevated level, and I was able to convince myself during the time and the doctor that everything was all good when it actually wasn't. And that is why, here's a little spoiler alert, that is why Elliot may be returning to the hospital, because we're not quite there yet. There's still a few things that are going on that need looking at. And I think a good example is that when I was discharged, I was flying a little bit too high, and I put on this act, and I thought everything was all good, and I convinced myself it was, and I was so overjoyed at getting out and being able to go to the wedding that I think it pushed me into the dangerous manic high. Because I tell you, they're probably going to do an episode on this as well. That wedding was amazing, and I'm so glad I went. It was brilliant, but unfortunately, Elliot got a little bit out of control. There was a bit too much happiness going on, and I got a little bit out of control later after the wedding. So, hold on tight, because there's an episode coming about that, because there's a lot more to this story than what this discharge paper says. But I do have to intervene and say, although, yes, Elliot was orientated, insightful, and hopeful, the truth is I was a bit overdone, or a bit underdone in some ways. So we're probably going to have to go back. But anyway, let's continue. I've been doing a lot of extra talking. We talked about pressured speech earlier. We're sort of in one of those moods as well. So thank you for listening and holding on, because this is a very difficult episode to get out. So I really appreciate you listening, and I hope I'm not waffling too much. Anyway, let's continue. All right, so medications on discharge: clomipramine, 200 milligrams, and quetiapine, 25 milligrams, which I'm slowly titrating off. But it is hard to get off quetiapine because you do struggle to sleep. So I'm still on 25 milligrams, but we were on 100, 150. So we're getting down, which is good news. Okay, follow-up. Elliot was planning to follow up with his GP. He asked if it was possible if I was able, this is the doctor, to see him on an outpatient basis. But unfortunately, this was not possible. I recommended he still keep in contact with his current psychiatrist. Having said that, though, I think Elliot's medications are fairly stable, and I envisage that he will continue to improve more, this is interesting, with a psychological input as opposed to psychiatric input. So there you go. So what that means is, and this is so true, because a lot of my issues are really core beliefs about myself, and they manifest themselves through my personality. Now, you cannot medicate personality, but you can talk through it and straighten it out with psychological interventions. And that is what he's saying there. A lot of Elliot's problems, they're not going to be sorted by medication, but what the medication can do is help facilitate Elliot getting into a space where he's then able to implement the behavioural and cognitive changes that are needed. So that's the whole story there. The medications will get me out of the real deep hole where I just can't do anything, can't get out of bed, can't move, I'm in freeze mode. It'll get me back into a state where I'm able to push forward, but then it's the psychological interventions that really are going to take me from, feeling okay to really engaging with the world, with life and living a life worth living, basically. Creating a life worth living. So yes, psychology moving forward is very, very important, but the medications have their role and it appears the clomipramine is doing some heavy lifting, which is great. Although, as I suggested before, I may need to go back and just double check that we've got all things covered. So clomipramine might need a little hand from another medication, but we will see and I'll keep you updated all the way. All right, moving on. Geez, I'm doing some waffling. Of note, there is some evidence for clomipramine's use in ADHD, and I'm hoping, this is the doctor, that the current regime may actually keep Elliot stable with his diagnostic complexities into the distant future. I wish him all the best. Thank you, doctor. Thank you very much. So that, my friends, is the discharge papers from my most recent visit to a psychiatric ward, this time the private hospital at Maitland. So there you go. There's been a lot of changes. I've come off a lot of medications. I've had very strong and difficult withdrawals, but we've been able to push through, which is great. We're on a new medication, clomipramine, which is a tricyclic antidepressant. Old school, not as clean as the newer SSRIs, for example, but seems to work well with people who are wired a bit differently. And that, my friends, is me. And that is why I've been given the new diagnosis when I was at the Maitland Hospital of Asperger's or high-functioning autism. Now, the only problem is we've had some difficulties since I've left hospital. That's going to come in another episode. Tell you what, there's plenty coming. That's for sure. Hold on tight. This is a wild ride. That's for sure. But there's been some problems since my admission at Maitland. So there's a bit more work to do. There is. But the story continues. And the good news is we've started gaining traction again. We've got a foothold. We're out of the hole, but there's a lot of work to do. But that's okay. That's okay. If I have the tools and the ability and I'm empowered and inspired to push forward with the psychological interventions, that's pretty good. I don't mind doing some hard work. Let's get stuck into it. And I'm very excited for that. So there you go. The discharge papers from my most recent visit to the psych ward. Oh, dear, oh dear. That was a very difficult episode to get out, but I think I got all out that I needed to. I want to thank everybody again for listening. It's been a little while since I've done an episode. Now, you may remember, I'll be trying to be quick about this. If you overlaid a mood chart, which I do not fill out anywhere near enough, with a podcast output chart, you would see a correlation between Elliot being in a good mood and producing podcast episodes. Now, I haven't done an episode for a fortnight or maybe even 3 weeks, and that, unfortunately, is because there's been a few issues. We're not running as good as I was hoping we would be, and that is why we might be returning to the hospital. But in saying that, we've got an episode out today, and I'm so thankful for everybody who listens because I really do appreciate it, and it's really doing wonders for my mental health. So thank you very much for listening. I can't wait for the next episode. There is so much material to come. Get ready, strap yourselves in. It's going to be big. So thank you for listening. I do appreciate it. And I'm Elliot Waters. This is the Dysregulated podcast. I will see you next time. Goodbye.